He called me into his office on his very first day as CEO. He was sitting in my father-in-law's chair, the one Walter Holt had occupied for 23 years, leaning back like he'd earned it. Like it belonged to him. His tie was slightly crooked, his new leather shoes still creaking when he crossed his legs, and he had that particular look on his face. The one I'd seen on men who'd been handed something they hadn't built and convinced themselves it was a reflection of their own greatness. There's a very specific kind of arrogance that comes from inherited position. It's different from the arrogance of someone who clawed their way to the top. The self-made man tends to be loud about his accomplishments because he remembers the days when nobody believed in him. But the man who was handed his position, he tends to be loud about his authority because deep down, he suspects it's the only thing separating him from ordinary. That suspicion makes him cruel in ways that feel, to him, like strength. His name was Preston Holt. He was 31 years old, had never held a job for more than 14 months, and had spent the better part of the last decade being quietly managed out of every situation his father had placed him in. He was not stupid. I want to be clear about that because this story is not about a stupid man making a stupid mistake. Preston was intelligent, charming when he chose to be, and possessed of a certain social fluency that should have been an asset. The tragedy of Preston Holt was not a lack of ability. It was a complete and catastrophic lack of perspective. The kind of perspective that only comes from building something from nothing, from failing on your own terms, from sitting across from someone who has no reason to be generous to you and choosing to be honest anyway. Preston had never done any of those things. And that morning, that gap, invisible to him but enormous, was about to define everything that followed. And now he was looking at me like I was something he'd found stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Garrison," he said, not even bothering with my last name. "We need to talk about your position here." I sat down across from him. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago that silence is one of the most powerful tools a man can use in a room where someone is about to make a very serious mistake. "Mom said you've been here for a while," Preston continued, straightening a pen on the desk that didn't need straightening. "She said Dad has a soft spot for you, that he feels guilty about something that happened years ago, and that's basically why you still have a job." He let that land. I nodded slowly. "She's not wrong that your father and I go back a long time," I said. Preston smiled. It was the smile of a man who thought he was in control of a room he didn't understand. "Well, Dad's in Costa Rica for 3 weeks. I'm in charge now, and I don't do charity." He slid a manila folder across the desk. "That's your termination package. Effective immediately. 2 weeks severance, which is more than generous considering your contributions." I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. "Preston," I said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing right now." Something shifted in his face. I don't think anyone had spoken to him that calmly in a long time. He was used to people either folding or exploding. My stillness unsettled him, and unsettled people do reckless things. He stood up from the chair. "I think you need to leave. I'd like 10 minutes to..." What happened next is the part I still think about. Not because it shocked me, but because of how perfectly it revealed exactly who Preston Holt was. He walked around the desk, grabbed the folder, and pressed it against my chest. Hard. Then he told me, in front of 2 junior managers who had just walked past the open office door, that I could escort myself out or he'd have security do it for me. Then he said the part that sealed everything. "You've been mooching off my father's guilt for years. That ends today. You're nothing here. You never were." I picked up the folder, I buttoned my jacket, and I looked at him one last time before I walked out. "You're going to regret this," I said, not as a threat, as a fact. He laughed. 3 days later, Walter Holt's plane landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor, and within 4 hours of him walking back into the building, I received a phone call. It wasn't from Walter. It was from Preston, and he wasn't laughing anymore. Before I explain what happened when Walter came home, I need to tell you who I am, something Preston never bothered to learn, and his mother didn't think mattered, even though it shaped everything that followed. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who never saw your worth, this story is for you, because it's about real people, real choices, and quiet justice that only makes sense when it's too late. My name is Garrison Cole. I'm 46 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, in a neighborhood called Arcadia, the kind of place where bougainvillea climbs the walls of mid-century houses and the mountains in the distance turn violet at sunset. I've lived there for 11 years, ever since I moved from Chicago with two things: a duffel bag and a folder of incorporation documents. I don't talk about money. I never have. It's a personal rule I adopted in my late 30s after watching too many men confuse their net worth with their self-worth, and too many relationships collapse under the weight of financial ego. I live simply. I drive a 6-year-old truck. I wear the same rotating wardrobe of dark shirts and clean jeans. I drink my coffee black, and I'm in bed by 10 most nights. What I am, quietly and without ceremony, is the co-founder and majority shareholder of Holt Cole Industrial Solutions, the company that Preston Holt just fired me from. Let me explain how that company came to exist. In 2009, Walter Holt was 52 years old and drowning. He'd built a mid-sized industrial supply company over 20 years. Good, honest work, reliable contracts with construction firms and manufacturing plants across Arizona and New Mexico. But the financial crisis had carved out his margins. One of his key partners had defaulted on a $1.8 million contract, and his bank had just informed him that his line of credit was being restructured in a way that would effectively kill his cash flow within 18 months. I was 31 at the time. I'd spent my 20s in private equity, working in Chicago for a firm that specialized in distressed industrial businesses. I knew how to read a company's bones, and when a mutual acquaintance introduced me to Walter over dinner at Durant's on North Central Avenue, the old steakhouse with the red leather booths and the paintings on the walls, I could see immediately that his company wasn't dying. It was just oxygen deprived. We talked for 4 hours that first night. Walter was the kind of man who told the truth even when it embarrassed him. He laid out his books without being asked, admitted his mistakes without hedging, and never once tried to spin the situation into something more palatable than it was. I found that extraordinary. In my years in finance, I'd sat across from hundreds of men in crisis. Most of them spent the first 90 minutes trying to convince me they weren't actually in crisis. Walter just said, "I've made some bad calls. I need a partner who can fix what I can't see." I went back to Chicago, reviewed everything he'd sent me, ran the numbers 3 different ways, and called him 2 weeks later. "I'll come in as a co-founder," I told him. "Majority stake, 55%, in exchange for a capital injection and restructuring control for 24 months. After that, you run operations. I stay silent on day-to-day. We split strategic decisions, and we both get out of this richer than we went in." Walter was quiet for a moment. "Why would you take 55% of a company that's struggling?" he asked. "Because I've read your contracts," I said. "You have 3 long-term agreements with municipal construction programs that are recession-proof. You have a warehouse infrastructure that would cost $8 million to replicate. And you have a reputation in this region that money can't buy. You're not struggling, you just ran out of runway." He agreed. "One condition," Walter added before we hung up. "Name it. We keep your role quiet inside the company. I've built 20 years of culture on the idea that the people who work here are working for something they understand and believe in. If they find out a private equity guy from Chicago owns the majority of the business, I lose that." He paused. "I don't want them to work for a shareholder. I want them to work for a company. There's a difference." It was the most insightful thing I'd heard from a business owner in years, and it told me everything I needed to know about why Walter's business was worth saving despite all its problems. "Agreed," I said. I moved to Phoenix. Over the next 2 years, I restructured the debt, renegotiated the credit line, landed 2 new federal supply contracts through relationships I'd built in Chicago, and quietly oversaw the operational changes that turned the company's margins from negative to healthy. By 2013, Holt Cole was profitable. By 2016, it was thriving. By last year, it was approaching $60 million in annual revenue, with expansion into Nevada and Utah. Walter and I never made our arrangement public inside the company. He ran the floor, managed the people, handled the relationships. I sat in an office in the back and handled strategy, financing, and the decisions that never made it into meeting minutes. It was the arrangement we both preferred. Most employees thought I was a long-tenured senior advisor. Some thought I was a consultant on retainer. The junior staff, the ones who'd joined in the last 5 or 6 years, barely knew my name. Preston, apparently, had been told by his mother that I was a charity case his father kept around out of misplaced loyalty. I don't know what Diane Holt believed about me. I never asked. Walter's wife was a complicated woman, brilliant in social situations, fiercely protective of her children, and constitutionally unable to believe that her son Preston was anything other than a diamond who hadn't yet been properly polished. She'd watched Preston fail his way through a marketing job, a sales directorship, a startup that spent $400,000 of his father's money on branded merchandise and folded in 11 months, and a partnership at a friend's restaurant that ended in a lawsuit. Each time, Diane had an explanation. The marketing firm undervalued him. The sales team was dysfunctional. The startup was ahead of its time. The restaurant partnership was sabotaged by jealousy. She never once considered the simpler explanation. I understood Diane's logic, even if I couldn't agree with her conclusions. She had watched her husband pour everything into a company for 2 decades. She had lived through the lean years and the frightening years and the years of uncertainty when the mortgage on their Paradise Valley house was the thing she thought about before she fell asleep. She had made certain sacrifices, social sacrifices, personal ones, to stand beside a man who was always thinking about his business. And when the business eventually prospered, some part of her had decided that prosperity belonged to the family. That the family, by extension, was built for success. That Preston, her son, her child, was simply a man who hadn't yet found the right container for his gifts. She wasn't a villain in this story. I want to say that plainly. She was a mother who loved her son so fiercely that the love had calcified into something that ultimately hurt him. Parents do that. It's one of the most heartbreaking patterns in human behavior, the protection that becomes the cage. Walter, for his part, loved his son with the particular anguish of a father who sees clearly what everyone else sees, but can't bring himself to say it out loud. He'd tried to create opportunities for Preston inside the company over the years, always carefully, always in roles where the damage could be contained. Preston had lasted 8 months in logistics coordination before a vendor complaint forced a reassignment. 6 months in sales support before a client relationship collapsed. 4 months in operations before Walter quietly moved him back out. The arrangement we'd landed on, the one that had held for the past 3 years, was that Preston was a special projects consultant with a generous salary, a company car, and a job description vague enough to keep him occupied without giving him authority over anything that actually mattered. That was the status quo until Walter decided to take Diane on a 3-week anniversary trip to Costa Rica. I don't know whose idea it was to make Preston acting CEO while Walter was gone. I suspect it was Diane's. I suspect Walter agreed because refusing would have meant having a conversation he'd been deferring for 30 years. And I suspect no one thought to ask me, because no one in that family, with the exception of Walter, actually understood what I was. I found out on a Monday morning when I arrived at the office on East Camelback Road and discovered that Preston had called an all-staff meeting the previous Friday afternoon and announced his temporary appointment. I missed the meeting because I'd been in Albuquerque, finalizing details on a new contract with the state infrastructure program. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Bree, filled me in when I walked in. "How was the mood in the room?" I asked. Bree chose her words carefully. "Cautious," she said. People were polite, but there was a lot of eye contact happening. I nodded. Did he say anything specific about operational changes? He said he was going to spend his first week doing performance assessments of senior staff. I sat with that for a moment. "Okay," I said. "Let me know when he wants to see me." The meeting request came at 11:14 that same morning. I've already told you how that meeting ended. Preston firing me, the folder, the 2 junior managers in the hallway, his hand against my chest, his voice loud enough to carry. What I haven't told you is what I did after I walked out of that building. I drove home. I made coffee. I sat on my back patio and watched a roadrunner cross the yard. The actual bird. The kind that lives in the Sonoran Desert. Fast and strange and completely unbothered by everything around it. I thought about that bird for a while. Then I called my attorney. His name is Douglas Faber, and he's been my corporate counsel for 14 years. He's the kind of lawyer who speaks in complete sentences and never raises his voice, which means when he does raise it, you pay attention. "Tell me exactly what happened," Douglas said. I told him. All of it. The folder, Preston's words, the physical contact in front of witnesses. There was a pause. "Garrison," Douglas said, "I want to be very clear about something. Preston Holt does not have the authority to terminate your employment. He doesn't have the authority to modify your role, your compensation, or any aspect of your relationship with the company. The shareholder agreement is unambiguous. Any structural changes to personnel at the director level or above require majority shareholder approval." He paused again. "That's you." "I know," I said. "So what do you want to do?" I looked at the Roadrunner, which had stopped at the edge of my patio and was regarding me with one yellow eye. "Nothing yet," I said. "Walter lands in 3 days. Let's wait." Douglas understood immediately. "You want him to see it for himself?" "I want Preston to have 3 days to believe he got away with it," I said. "There's a difference. Those 3 days were quieter than you might expect. I want to address something directly, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why didn't you go back immediately? Why didn't you call Walter in Costa Rica and tell him? Why didn't you have Douglas file the injunction that same day, march back into the building, and make absolutely certain that Preston understood, publicly, irrevocably, exactly what he'd done and exactly who he'd done it to?" I've thought about that a lot. And here's my answer. Because I'm 46 years old, and I've watched enough situations to know that when someone makes a mistake of that magnitude, when they reach that far beyond their actual authority and grasp for something that isn't theirs, the most effective response is almost never the loudest one. The loudest response gives them a narrative to hide behind. It lets them become the wronged party in their own retelling. It creates noise that covers the signal. The signal, in this case, was simple. Preston had fired the majority shareholder of the company he thought he was running. That fact didn't need amplification. It needed stillness. It needed 3 days of Preston walking around believing he had cleaned house, made his mark, demonstrated his decisive leadership. It needed him to have enough time to feel comfortable before the ground shifted. I didn't go back to the office. I worked from home, handled my correspondence, took 2 calls with the Nevada expansion team, and had dinner with my wife Nadine on the patio both nights. Nadine is a landscape architect with her own firm in Tempe. We've been married for 7 years. She grew up in Flagstaff, went to school at ASU, and has a particular quality I've always admired. She understands the difference between a problem that needs solving immediately and a problem that needs to be allowed to develop before you touch it. When I told her what Preston had done, she was quiet for a long moment. "Did he know?" she asked. "No." "Does his mother know what you actually are to that company?" "I don't think so. Walter kept it private, the way we agreed." Nadine nodded slowly, her wine glass turning in her hand. The Phoenix night was warm, the air carrying the faint smell of orange blossom from the neighbors' trees. "He's going to panic when he finds out," she said. "Yes." "Are you going to make it easy for him?" I thought about Preston's hand pressing that folder against my chest, the 2 junior managers in the hallway. His voice. "You're nothing here. You never were." "No," I said. "I'm not." Nadine looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached over and touched my hand. "Good," she said. Walter Holt's flight landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor at 2:18 in the afternoon on a Thursday. I know the exact time because Douglas texted me when he confirmed with Walter's assistant that the car had been dispatched. Walter called me at 4:47. I was in my home office reviewing the Nevada contract documents when my phone lit up with his name. "Walter," I said. "Garrison." His voice was different, flat in a specific way I recognized, the flatness of a man who is controlling something very large and very hot inside his chest. "I need you to tell me what happened." "How much do you know?" "I know Preston called a staff meeting and announced he was CEO. I know he held what he called performance assessments for 3 days. I know he terminated 4 employees, including you." A pause. "I know he physically contacted you in front of witnesses while doing it." "That's accurate." Silence. "Garrison," Walter said, and his voice cracked slightly at the edge of my name. I don't have words for what I am right now." "You don't need words right now," I said. "You need to talk to your son. I talked to him 20 minutes ago." Another pause. He had no idea. He genuinely had no idea. I let that sit. He thought Diane was right, Walter continued. He thought you were here because I felt sorry for you. He said he was cleaning up the company, making it leaner. Walter's voice dropped. He didn't know. I never told him. That's on me. Walter, I'm going to need you to come to the office tomorrow morning. Both of you. I'm going to handle this correctly. The conference room on the 4th floor of the Camelback Road building had floor-to-ceiling windows facing Camelback Mountain, which on a clear Phoenix morning turns a shade of amber that looks almost intentional, like someone lit it from the inside. I'd sat in that room hundreds of times. It was where Walter and I had made our most important decisions over 15 years. I arrived at 8 o'clock. Bree brought coffee without being asked. Preston arrived at 8:15. He walked in looking like a man who had spent the previous 12 hours not sleeping. His jacket was on, but his collar was open. He stopped when he saw me sitting at the table. I nodded once. He sat down at the far end, not looking at me. Walter came in at 8:30. He set a folder on the table, not unlike the one Preston had handed me 4 days earlier, and sat at the head between us. He was 67 years old and had the look that some men carry at that age, the look of someone who has survived things and knows exactly what surviving costs. His hair had gone fully white in the last few years. His hands were still the hands of a man who had worked in warehouses before he owned them. I'm going to explain something, Walter said. He wasn't looking at either of us specifically. He was looking at the folder. And I want both of you to listen without interrupting me. He opened the folder. His hands, I noticed, were very steady. Walter had always been a steady-handed man. It was one of the things I'd admired about him in that first meeting at Durant's, when he'd laid out his troubled financials without a tremor in his voice or his fingers. Some men fall apart under the weight of what they've built and what it costs. Walter carried the weight differently. It slowed him down and made him deliberate, the way ballast steadies a ship. Garrison Cole is the co-founder and majority shareholder of Holt Cole Industrial Solutions. He holds 55% of this company. He has held that position since 2009, when he provided the capital and restructuring expertise that prevented this company from collapsing. Walter slid a document across to Preston. That is the original shareholder agreement. I'd like you to read the first page. Preston picked it up with hands that I noticed were not entirely steady. He read it. He set it down. He still didn't look at me. The 4 employees you terminated, Walter continued, will be reinstated today with full back pay and a written apology from the company. The vendors you contacted about renegotiating terms will be called today to clarify that those conversations are void. The operational changes you announced in the Tuesday all-staff email will be rescinded. Walter closed the folder. And Garrison's position, compensation, and authority are fully reinstated, effective immediately, which means they were never actually suspended, because you did not have the authority to suspend them. Preston was looking at the table. Preston, Walter said. His son looked up. I owe you a conversation I should have had years ago, Walter said. And I owe Garrison an apology for creating a situation where this was possible. He turned to me. I'm sorry, Garrison. The structure we agreed to, keeping your role private, made sense at the time. I should have revisited it before I left. I nodded. I understand. Walter turned back to Preston. What you did, specifically the physical contact, the public humiliation, the words you used, goes beyond a business mistake. That's a personal matter between you and Garrison. I can't fix that. Only you can. The room was very quiet. Camelback Mountain sat in the window behind Walter, amber and still. Preston finally looked at me. He was 31 years old, and for the first time since I'd known him, peripherally, the way you know someone who moves through your life at a distance, he looked like exactly that. 31 years old. Not a CEO. Not a fixer. Just a young man who had done something he could not take back and was only now beginning to understand what it actually cost. I didn't know, he said. His voice was very quiet. I know you didn't, I said. That's not... He stopped. That doesn't make it okay. What I said. What I did. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Another silence. I'm sorry, Preston said. And I want to be precise about this, because it matters. He said it like he meant it. Not the way people apologize when they're trying to manage consequences. The way people apologize when they've genuinely looked at what they've done and found it unbearable. I thought about Nadine's question on the patio. Are you going to make it easy for him? Preston, I said, I've been in this company for 15 years. Your father and I built something real together. I'm not interested in destroying it, and I'm not interested in destroying you. I leaned forward slightly. But I need you to understand something. What happened in that office, the folder, the physical contact, what you said in front of those two managers, that wasn't just an error in judgment. That was a choice, and choices have weight. He nodded. I'm willing to move forward, I said. But moving forward requires honesty. It requires you understanding what this company actually is, and what your role in it actually is, and I paused. What you're capable of contributing to it. Not what your mother thinks you're capable of. What you actually are. Walter was watching me. There was something in his face I recognized. The expression of a man who had wanted someone to say something for a very long time, and was only now hearing it said. I'd like to offer you something, I continued. Not out of charity, out of the same logic I applied to your father in 2009. There is something in this company you could genuinely contribute to. The Nevada expansion needs a local relationship manager. Someone who can represent the company at the ground level, build vendor trust, handle the human side of the market entry. It's real work. It's work that plays to what you're actually good at. I looked at him steadily. You are good with people, Preston, when you're not trying to impress them. I've watched you enough to know that. He blinked. I don't think he'd expected that. But it would mean starting from scratch, I said. No title inflation. No special designations. A real role with real accountability and real consequences if you don't perform. Why would you offer me that? He asked. The question was genuine, not strategic. Because your father built something worth protecting, I said. And because I've never believed that people are fixed. I've seen too many men who looked like failures turn out to be simply misplaced. I sat back. I could be wrong about you, but I'd rather find out honestly than assume. The phone call I referenced at the beginning of this story, the one from Preston 3 days after Walter landed, came at 6:43 in the morning. I was already awake. I was on the patio with my coffee, watching the desert sky go from gray to pale gold to a thin, sharp blue. His name appeared on my screen and I let it ring twice before I answered. Garrison. His voice was wrecked, raw in the way voices get when someone hasn't slept and has been crying, though I'd never tell him I noticed that. Preston. Dad just told me. A pause. He told me everything. About the shareholder agreement. About what you did in 2009. About... His voice broke slightly. About what the company actually is. Okay, I said. I hit you, he said. In front of people, I said... He stopped. I said things I can't take back. No, you can't. I'm calling because my dad said I should call you, but also because... Another pause. Longer. Because I need you to know that I'm not calling because of what you are in the company. I'm calling because of what I did to you as a person. And those are different things. I looked at the pale gold sky over the Camelback. They are different things, I said. And yes, that distinction matters. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, I said. That's not how this works. You can only move differently from here. Silence. My mother. He started, then stopped. Your mother loves you, I said. That's real. What she told you about me wasn't malicious, Preston. It was just wrong. People build stories about things they don't understand, and she didn't understand what I was. That's not entirely her fault. She should have asked. Yes, she should have. I should have asked. Yes, I said. You should have. A long, settling quiet came through the phone. The kind that happens when two people have stopped performing and are just being honest with each other. I want to take the Nevada position, Preston said finally. If it's still available, if that was real. It was real. I want to earn it. Actually, earn it. I know I said that before, in other situations, and I didn't. He exhaled. I didn't follow through, but I mean it differently now. I think I understand something I didn't understand before. What's that? I asked. A pause. That things don't belong to you just because they're in your family, he said. My dad built something. You built something. I haven't built anything, and pretending I was owed something because of who my father is, that was... He stopped. That was the problem. That's always been the problem. I sat with that. Preston, I said, show up Monday morning, not to the Camelback office. I'll send you the address of the Nevada team's temporary Phoenix base. Be there at 8. Dress like you're going to a job site, not a meeting, and leave your father's name at the door. Okay. You won't be introduced as Walter Holt's son, I said. You'll be introduced as Preston, the new regional liaison. That's it. That's all you are until you make yourself something more. Understood. One more thing, I said. Yeah. The 2 managers who were in that hallway, the ones who saw what you did to me. A beat of silence. I know, he said quietly. You'll find a moment to address that, not formally, just as a man. You'll know when. Another silence. I will, he said. I believed him. I need to tell you one more piece of this story before I close, because it involves Diane Holt, and I think it's the part that changed me most. 3 weeks after everything settled, after the 4 employees were reinstated, after the vendor calls were made, after Preston had been in Nevada for 2 weeks and was, by all accounts from the team there, actually showing up. Walter called and asked if Nadine and I would come to dinner. Just family, he said. Diane wants to apologize. I talked to Nadine about it. She listened, as she always does, without rushing toward an opinion. Do you want to go? She asked. I'm not sure what I want, I said honestly, but I think I should. We went on a Saturday evening. The Holts lived in Paradise Valley, in a house that sat on a hill above the city. The kind of house where you could sit on the terrace and see all of Phoenix spread out below like a circuit board lit up at night. Walter grilled steaks. Nadine and Diane sat with glasses of white wine, while Walter and I stood by the grill the way men do, half watching the meat, half having a different conversation entirely. Diane came to me before dinner. She was 64, elegant in the particular way of women who have always known they were being watched. She had Preston's eyes, the same dark brown, the same intelligence underneath. She walked out to where I was standing at the edge of the terrace and stood beside me, looking at the city below. I owe you an apology, she said. Diane, no, let me say it. She turned to look at me directly. I told Preston a story about you that I made up because it made things simpler. You were a variable I didn't understand, and I turned you into something smaller than you were so I didn't have to understand you. A pause. That's a thing I've done my whole life. Made people smaller so they fit into the narrative I needed. I didn't say anything. I did it to Preston too, she said. Made him larger than he was. For the same reason, I needed a narrative. She looked back at the city. He called me from Nevada last week. He sounded different. More tired, but more real. He told me he was learning the supply chain from the bottom. He said one of the warehouse workers there had been teaching him how the inventory system worked, and he'd stayed 3 hours late to understand it. She paused. He said it was the first time in his life he'd stayed late at a job because he wanted to. I watched the lights of Phoenix below. You gave him that, Diane said. When you didn't have to. When most people wouldn't have. Walter built something worth protecting, I said. Preston's part of what Walter built. She was quiet for a moment. You're a complicated man to hate, she said. And despite everything, we both almost laughed. I'm 46 years old. I've been in Phoenix for 15 years. I built a company alongside a man who told me the truth the first night we met, and that truth was the foundation of everything that came after. I want to sit with you in this final part of the story for a moment, because I think there's something here that gets missed in the version of these events that you might expect. The version where the humiliated man walks back in triumphant, where the person who underestimated him is destroyed, where the moral is something clean and satisfying about justice arriving like a hammer. That's not this story. Preston Holt is still here. He's in Reno, building something real for the first time in his life, working alongside people who don't know his family name, learning the supply chain from the people who actually understand it. He calls Walter on Sunday evenings. He's made 2 suggestions to the Nevada operations team that were good enough to implement. He still has a long way to go, and there's no guarantee he'll go the distance. Growth is not linear, and some people find the first real accountability of their lives too heavy to carry. But he's trying. And trying, when you've never had to try before, is one of the hardest things a person can do. Diane Holt and I will never be close. That's just true. The relationship is cordial, careful, and built on a mutual understanding that we see the world differently, and always will. But she came to me on that terrace and told me something honest. And honesty is always worth something, no matter who delivers it. Walter and I are still partners. That hasn't changed. If anything, the way this situation resolved, the transparency it forced, the conversations it required, made the partnership more solid than it had been in years. There's a paradox in that, but it's the kind of paradox that makes sense if you've ever watched a relationship get stronger precisely because it was tested. And Nadine, who listened on the patio with her wine glass and said good when I told her I wasn't going to make it easy for him, is still the person I want to have dinner with at the end of every day. Some things are simple. That's one of them. I've thought about what I would tell someone who's been where I was, sitting across from a person who has decided without evidence what your value is and acted accordingly. Someone who pressed a folder against your chest and said, "You're nothing here." Here's what I know. The most dangerous thing you can do when someone underestimates you is prove them wrong immediately. Because the proof they need isn't the proof that happens in the moment, the dramatic reveal, the loud vindication. The proof that actually matters is the proof that comes from continuing to be exactly who you are, building exactly what you're building, while they construct their version of reality out of their own assumptions. Let them. Eventually, reality corrects itself. It always does. The question is only whether you'll still be standing in the same place, unchanged, when it happens. Preston Holt pressed a folder against my chest and told me I was nothing. 3 days later, he was calling me at 6:43 in the morning, asking me to teach him something real. That's not a story about revenge. That's a story about patience, about knowing what you've built, about the particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself until someone else's mistake makes the announcement for it. Holt Coal Industrial Solutions is still on East Camelback Road. The Nevada expansion launched on schedule. Preston is still in Reno, still showing up, still learning things from people who have no idea who Sonny is. Walter and I still have breakfast at Durant's occasionally, still in the same red leather booth. He still tells the truth even when it embarrasses him. That's still the most valuable thing about him. And on my back patio in Arcadia, sometimes in the early morning before the city wakes up, I see that roadrunner cross the yard. Fast, strange, completely unbothered by everything around it. I've decided that's the right way to move through the world.